A good hook for a story is a necessity. Typically, the way this is done, especially in a visual novel format, is starting right in the middle of a dramatic scene. Tsukihime naturally follows suit, but it's a bit different in that there's two real story hooks. The first is, of course, the prologue that you see when you open up the visual novel, but the second comes along when the routes split. It's in that secondary hook where I'd argue the most gripping scene in Tsukihime can be found. To really set the mood, let's put some flowers around it and really get into it. After Shiki puts his expert chopping abilities on display and the reader chooses the more rational option of accepting Shiki's actions as his own, he lays on the park bench, his mind running a million thought processes at once and not making any leeway save for the idea of lying there till he dies. When he thinks about what's going to happen next or tries to figure out what it is he just did and why, his mind, like his body, goes cold and nearly freezes. He doesn't have the answers. Actually, no, he just doesn't want to face them. He views offing himself as the easy way out, as a crutch to not actually go through the pain of living a life filled with regrets. An insight into his character is attained as Shiki worries more about how all this will affect his sister and friends. The pain of loss is something he just doesn't want to give them on top of all of this. Lost in thoughts all alone, who should come splashing down his path like the ocean's gray waves but Ciel. In all the scenes we've seen her in up until now, she's been a source of comfort. She prods Shiki about opening up to her more, and because of their conversations, he always faces his own worries with just a little less stress. And in this meeting, she's doing just that. If her dear junior feels like he can't go anywhere, she'll give him a place to stay, something to eat, and treat him with unconditional kindness. Almost unreasonable amounts of it. By the time they're having tea, Shiki's frozen mentality is warmed up. His brain can finally return to some semblance of functionality and open up a bit. All the aforementioned things she's given him are vital to what comes next, but what comes next is undoubtedly the most important. She talks to him, tells him there's no such thing as an unforgivable sin, just those who can and cannot atone. And she knows he can atone no matter what it was he did. He just needed a little push. When Ciel leaves for a bit, her hypothesis of him being able to do just that is proven. His mind, now that he's alone, returns to cold thoughts, but he's able to process them one by one till he's accepted reality. Though he may have made life for him and everyone around him unbearable for a bit, if he keeps the words of his dear senpai close to his heart, he can face the noise and do what he's gotta. Now, here's where the hook sinks in. Right as tiredness overtakes Shiki, we see a dead-eyed Ciel applying religious markings all across her body. The reader is left to sit with what just happened, and the rest of the route is seemingly set up and ready to be one of the best. I can't overstate how much I love this scene. Everything about it. That little tease at the end really made me question everything I had just read on my first read-through of Suki. I mean, the kindness she gave off was almost unreal, and this CG confirms those thoughts in a really satisfying manner. However, what happens over the next few days of the route is so baffling that, on my first read, I, honest to God, thought I was on the Archway route. Now, could that have been because of the next few days of the route up until the death of Nero being word for word the same as the Archway route? Maybe. Or maybe it was that Shiki only acknowledged Archway when she and Ciel were both brought to the forefront of his mind. It's a nice possibility. Or maybe it was that Ciel doesn't take a major part in her own route until the last few days. This video is going to be a bit more nitpicky than anything I've done before. I desperately wanted to love this route, and Ciel in terms of characters is definitely quite up there for me. I mean, just look at that list. Hopefully I edit a list. And that's not to say there aren't elements of this route I didn't like. As a matter of fact, this route succeeds in spades where the Archway route failed. And that's just not about one point, that's just a general overall statement. Whereas I loved the Archway route for the relationship and character actions presented, and kind of found it lacking in terms of lore and the Roa elements, I find the Ciel route fumbles hard in the relationships while kind of picking up the slack in the lore department. Before picking apart that relationship, let's start off something positive. Let's dive into those good elements. While threat-wise, Roa still amounts to tissue paper, in this route we get to see his past through more or less interludes whenever Shiki sleeps. Seeing Roa's quest for eternity unfold in the life of his last host's horrific actions go so far in making him a more compelling villain. The reader may not agree with his actions, but they can at least understand them now. Alright, positives out of the way, let's talk about the rest of the route. Okay, I may be exaggerating slightly with that, but it's no joke when I say that Ciel herself has a bad case of the Roa in the last route, and due to that, we are naturally told everything interesting about her as opposed to actually seeing it. Sure, she has some neat CGs that illustrate her role in the church, but tell me, does she actually demonstrate ever that she should hold the 7th, what we're told to be the strongest seat, as a member of the burial agency? If you can think of an answer, please tell me, because I've been looking everywhere. Ciel never takes out anything in her own route. The closest she comes to is Shiki, who is purposefully throwing the fight because he can't bring himself to attack her. She loses against Archway, just stands on a light pole when Nero is around, and the closest she comes to actually doing something, one of the bad ends mind you, Shiki kills her as well. We never get to see her in action and actually feel like she's this powerful person we've been told she was. Strike 1. 3 days of this route are verbatim the Archway route. As a consequence of this, you can't really take away the lingering affection Shiki has by the end of the Nero fight and expect it to not feel forced. Problem is, Nasu course corrects in the total opposite direction. Oh, it might be expected that Shiki chooses Ciel after some initial struggle because, you know, she's the reason he's been able to handle things as well as he has. Instead, we're given a love triangle. A love triangle that could work in concept, but in practice is only used in the most cliched and sigh-inducing manner. Due to his lingering affection, Shiki's time is more or less split between the two for the majority of the story. And when he does talk with Ciel, it's usually about Archwade, then lore expositing about things most readers will have likely just read in the last route. Finally, she concludes with the warning to steer clear of Miss Vampire. It'd be understandable if this happened once, say, after the Nero stuff, but it happens twice, as Shiki would rather see Archwade than actually listen to Ciel, and that makes things kinda repetitive. More so when Archwade says the same about Ciel and points out that she's done nothing but lie to him. Now, nice in theory, this could have been a really interesting plot point where Shiki worries about if he can trust anyone, but what we're given instead is Shiki asking himself, do I love her? I don't know. About both Archwade and Ciel. Our selfless protagonist is so far up his own ass that he spends his free time worrying about that instead of the people around him. Shiki is a teenage boy and thus is going to be sexually frustrated at times, but think back to that initial scene with him on the park bench. A Shiki that knows Archwade and Ciel, two people that he's rather fond of, wanted to kill each other, wouldn't spend time thinking about who he wants to get it on with. He'd be thinking about, how do I make them stop wanting to kill each other? Shiki can feel those feelings and be confused about who they're for, but that shouldn't be his main focus as someone who typically prioritizes others above himself. The characterization just feels confused for most of the route, and sadly, that isn't just the case for our MC. This time, split between the heroines and Shiki's own headassery leaves little time for us to learn about Ciel. What I feel is the biggest failing of the story, Ciel tells Shiki outright that she wants nothing more than the sweet release of death. We're never shown her struggling with that choice, and her backstory, though mortifying in how it parallels Shiki's own descent, is something we never get a part 2 of. It ends when Archwade kills Roa and the cycle begins anew. We see points A and C of her characterization, but point B is a bit muddled, if not missing entirely. I don't want suffering in the story for the sake of it, but when she tells Shiki that she was tortured for a month, and that has seemingly had no effect on her other than her expression in a single CG, it isn't compelling writing. It's a lazy excuse to make Ciel seem deep without actually showing us why that is. And there are legitimate reasons why that is. As it stands in the visual novel though, that month of torture might as well not even exist, seeing as it has no bearing on her or anyone around her. Strike 2. The Ciel route has some of the best, most calming slice-of-life stuff I've ever read. I missed scenes like this in the Archway route, and I'm not sure if it's the CG, or that like Shiki, I find Ciel to be a warm and inviting character to be around, but these scenes both carry the plot and stay in that relaxing atmosphere. We're always left something to think about by the end, typically something serious like vampires or the murders around town, but the way it's written makes me want to go to the tea ceremony room any chance I can get. There is a distinct problem though. The conversation is typically a very one-sided affair. While I love the pair talking about Shiki's life and the goings-on around town, not hearing a peep about Ciel is kinda bad for the story. Shiki may be thick at times, but even he asks questions about the people he has an investment in. Think back to the Akia and Archway routes where he frequently asked about their own well-being. For him to not ask a single thing about Ciel's own life, and instead he's just told everything about her at one singular moment, it doesn't come off as natural, it comes off as exposition. I think Ciel's backstory is fascinating for the record, but the way it's handled through lore dumps, and us simply being told she cares about her school life just because, doesn't work. I can certainly understand why she does, given her backstory, but no seeds have been planted anywhere in the route before we're told that she missed it. We see her in that school life, and that is engaging stuff, and we also see her in church robes at night, and that is also, to a lesser extent because of the love triangle, engaging. But there's no interplay between the two. Ciel either goes to school to keep a front or is simply gone entirely, with seemingly no effect on her well-being, in any of the routes. We can be as endeared to a character as possible, but if we don't get a sense of why she herself held those conversations in her daily life dear, then when she breaks down and cries about losing them, it's kind of hard to feel anything. Ironically, it's the one thing not copied over from the Archway route that would have solved this issue. A date between the two, or at least the option to ask Ciel about her 3 sizes or something to that effect. Points A and C are there, but point B is muddled if not missing entirely. You guys ever get that feeling of deja vu? A lot about this route could work with some minor changes. Something as simple as Ciel taking out Nero and her worry of Shiki being consumed by his animals would 1. Let us see her in an action set piece where she actually does something. Wild, right? And 2. Would actively make her prioritize Shiki over her own cover, in turn letting her take the first step towards figuring out what it is she cares more about. You know, instead of Shiki just kind of stumbling across her during the night on pure happenstance. I feel like something to that effect would create a better transition from her dead eyes at the start to "Why don't you hate me?" near the end. That line is something I think Nasu realized didn't exactly land the way he wanted. I say this because it's propped up by the second worst thing in this route, the overbearing melodrama. The dialogue from Ciel in this scene, Shiki's inner monologue about which girl he likes more, and the second confrontation between Archway, Ciel, and Shiki are standout examples. What's said in each is rephrased, re-emphasized, and restated so many times that it feels like it's beating me over the head saying, "Do you get it yet?" Maybe this stuff is subjective, but reading those scenes in particular, I found myself actively cringing. And this is all stuff that could have been avoided without that dumb love triangle plot point. A plot point which you can't write out of the story without giving Ciel the first half of her route. Now, you can absolutely still end up where Shiki and Ciel do in the latter half of the story, but instead of a love triangle, what if Shiki's attachment to Archway was out of an obligation he feels he owes her when she pops back up halfway through the route? He'd more realistically go against Ciel's wishes to do what he views as making amends with Archway, especially when Ciel's words at the start were about just that. That'd cause a more believable rift between the two that's more than Ciel being petty towards Shiki for the sake of drama and actively making her character worse. Her following Shiki to the park, not saying a word to him about what she's doing, feels childish. And that's probably the last word I'd use to describe Ciel any other time. If anything, she seems like the type of character to get actively angry at him in this situation, or at least not be so overt about it. Because not being overt about what she's actually doing or feeling is one of the key characteristics about Ciel. In a clever bit of dialogue that's blink and you miss it, when questioned if she was the one in church robes at the park, Ciel asked if the person near the Tono mansion 2 nights ago looked like her. While Shiki not wanting to believe it was her certainly helps out in this situation, Her carrying the conversation after that slip-up is just a further testament to her skills as a wordsmith. And as a mage, her deceit piles up to the point where she has to actively wonder why Shiki doesn't hate her when it's all said and done. The characterization of Ciel in those scenes and the one where she says stuff like, "Oh, I'm not following you, I just also have business in the park," feel like two entirely different characters, one of which I want to read more about, and the other is present for the majority of the story. This confused characterization makes an already underdeveloped character fall even flatter as the audience is finally getting to know her beyond the lie presented at the start. The emotional climax of the arc, which hinges on Ciel telling Shiki the truth, again, does not land because of stuff like this. On top of that is Shiki just accepting everything the instant he's told it. Sure, he's an accepting person, but a moment of distrust is something he had for Archwade and both of the near side routes. Him just quickly writing off everything Ciel does is baffling to me when the spell she cast on him has long since been removed. As is typical of him in this route for some reason, he doesn't even want to ask her about it. She just tells him everything in that oh so pivotal moment. Relationships are founded on trust, and while I agree that Shiki should ultimately trust Ciel, he doesn't even register that Archwade might have had a point after realizing that Ciel was deceiving him. Sadly, this scene continues in the eroge scene. This route is the first of its kind to be for reasons other than something that feels natural. They must have sex because of Roa. That is quite literally the explanation given after Shiki's attempts to whack off in Ciel's bathroom don't work. Now, I'm not saying that every sex scene has to be an act of love or whatnot, but everything about this feels contrived to have an erotic scene because that's exactly what it is. Slotted in at the last minute because visual novels won't sell without sex. It breaks the flow of the story and is the nail in the coffin for their relationship to me. The Roa urges manifest themselves in more ways than just calming an erection. They're visceral, violent, and salacious. Not just the salacious part. Those three manifest themselves in tandem. Ciel's house can have all the barriers and prevent Roa from manifesting in the mind as much as they want, but if you're telling me that the room is set up in such a way that it explicitly traps Roa in the groin, I'm gonna start thinking this is a parody of bad sex scenes in visual novels. And fuck it, it might as well be considering how Nasu writes this stuff. The act itself is the most fetishistic in Tsukihime, incest war be damned. And with that comes legendary lines, which I'll attempt to get on the screen right now, but censorship can only go so far. Hashtag the glasses make Ciel senpai, by the way. To actually get to something good again, let's actually analyze the saving grace I brought up earlier. Roa. Archwade being the one to take out Tono in this route, causing Roa to flow to Shiki is a rather nice surprise. It takes a pre-existing plot point, the connection between Akia, Tono, and Shiki, and utilizes it in a way I doubt anyone expected their first time, leading to what I'd consider the brightest spot in a sea of mediocrity. I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record with this show-don't-tell nonsense, but humor me a bit more for a sec. The audience seeing Shiki lose his shit and retaliate on the school desk, a chair Hisui left out, and even Kohaku goes really far in showing us just what Tono, and by extension Ciel, were dealing with. As well as proving that it wasn't just that they were weak, Roa can infect anyone with those destructive urges and ruin their lives for the betterment of his own goals. When we see Shiki assault Kohaku, the audience gets to feel how sickening those impulses can be, and how damning they'd be to anyone who's had them. Like with the Archwade rape scene in the last route, isn't it uncomfortable? Yes, but that's the point. Not to pull a Ciel route and talk at length about Archwade again, let's go back to Ciel. This route fails a lot, but why Ciel hates Archwade and Roa is definitely not one of them. Archwade is responsible for giving birth to the dead apostle Roa, who possessed Ciel and caused her to do all sorts of horrific things. The route makes that crystal clear to great effect. It's the one thing she never gives Shiki and always divides them. It's something that stays true all the way to the ending, which is actually a really beautiful... What a wacky read. The good ending of the route devalues all the animosity between Archwade and Ciel by turning it into a romantic comedy. Not only was Shiki justified in his thoughts of loving both while more important things were going on, but apparently the route encouraged it. I don't have a ton to say about this ending, or as it's titled, Sun. Other than that, it's incredibly mid at best. It's the worst ending of Tsukihime. No, scratch that. It's the worst ending of anything I've seen in my tenure on this planet, and I've seen Orihime like 3 different times. This ending is everything wrong about this route just wrapped up into one nice little bow. And my notes for this particular part of the story amount to literally nothing more than Ciel gets cucked, the end. Let's analyze that phrase, shall we? Ciel gets robbed of a fulfilling relationship with Shiki, and that is a problem, yes, but she's been consistently robbed throughout the route. Of the days leading up to the narrow fight, in the middle portion with Archway taking up space in Shiki's mind, and now in her own good ending, she has nothing. The route ends with her chasing after Archway and Shiki, and well, that about sums up the route better than I ever could. Ciel never got her time in the sun, pause for effect, like the beginning of the route so elegantly hinted that we would. We never see what those days at school meant to her, nor how impacted she'd be at the loss of Shiki to Roa. It has the same problems of Sunny Day in UBW. It's a cop-out spawned from the lackluster elements the route put forth. In both UBW and the Ciel route, relationships with the prior main heroine are certainly still there, but all of that was properly explored in the story most readers will have just read. However, even Sunny Day has something over Sun. Saber didn't particularly have that overtly happy ending in her own route. It was like the true end of the Archway route, where the two are fated to never meet again. Problem is, and you can probably already see where I'm going with this, Archway already had her own good ending. This gives her another ending to call her own, leading to her more or less becoming the main heroine of the Ciel route. I mean, she has about half of the screen time, and Shiki goes with her instead of Ciel in the ending, turning this route full circle into what our Lord and Savior Nasu likely intended from the start, a rewrite of the Archway route. Now, I will state plainly that I am certainly presuming a lot here, but it doesn't seem like a stretch to me for Nasu to think about what he could have done better in the Archway route, and for those elements to slowly seep over into the Ciel route. And to his credit, those elements certainly have been done better in the Ciel route. I've already talked about Roa a fair amount, but even Archway herself is given a part of her characterization here that really adds to her overall flavor. After Roa is transferred to Shiki, she more or less becomes the de facto antagonist, something we thankfully see take full effect in the true ending. Archway is a force to be reckoned with, taking out Ciel almost effortlessly while it's all Shiki can do to beg her to stop. This, right here, is what their confrontation should have been from the start. With Archway having gained some of her power back, she becomes nearly unstoppable to the pair of almost lovers. This creates reasonable tension between all 3 parties, as Shiki just wants everyone to make it out alive, but those two hate each other. And they both realize Shiki is the host for Roa at this point. Oh my god, is this actual drama? In the Ciel route? Ciel rushes out to stop him from following through with it, I felt something I hadn't for the majority of the route. Emotion. What follows is either one of the best endings, or the most pompous depending on your preference. Personally, I lean towards this ending being one of the best, conceptually, in Tsukihime. I'll explain what I mean by that after laying the groundwork a bit. See, Shiki is in a comatose state between life and death, a kinda gray area where he can only see this dream. The events of the dream start out mundane, with Shiki waking up in the same hospital from when he was 9, and Arihiko talking to him like it was no big deal. For someone who was in a coma for 2 months, he gets up and gets back to normal life the same day like it was just a nice little nap. Then, he heads to the mansion to get ready for school the same day. He notices the figure of a small boy near the detached building, but that's all he sees before continuing his day like normal. The final red flag for this being a dream is Ciel. Shiki blissfully ignored her lie about being near the mansion before, but now that it relates back to her own life, he can't help but notice. In this dream, her father apparently runs a bakery. He can't ignore the inconsistencies, and that sends him further into a trippy state where he meets up with that figure from before. That boy turns out to be Nanaya Shiki. Not the psychopathic tendencies, but the boy who died when Shiki became Tono Shiki during the accident 8 years ago. He has no memories of the time before the accident, as they were locked away by Makihisa, doomed to be left to rot inside some deep corner of his subconscious. His younger self acknowledges that they are essentially two different people that can't imagine the lives the other must have led. The only time they can truly fill the gaps of the other is in this dream. That's what Shiki stands to gain by staying here. An eternity of a repeated dream where he can be whole and everyone around him is happy. Naturally for Shiki, that isn't even an option. If he's the only one who could be really happy, then he couldn't be happy at all. Even if in a vegetative state, he'd choose to be in his own world than one of a dream. His younger self agrees and they part. Shiki chooses to leave the past behind him and move forward in this new life he's found himself in, no matter how detached from his original self nor how terrifying it might be. Wait, that sounds awfully familiar to someone else's character arc. Ciel was stuck in the regrets of her own past for the majority of the route, though we don't see much of it, in spite of how much fun it was to live a cozy school life. That to her was just a lie, none more so evident than in that initial scene where she comforted Shiki after he committed his own unforgivable sin. To her, that moment served as further proof that Shiki was indeed the host for Roa this time around. And though she's still going out to make sure that's not the case, I think the reason she looks so dead-eyed in that scene is due to the realization that this boy, who she just spent the past 2 days getting to know and develop a bond with, is someone she'll likely have to kill to do what she has to. She herself wants to die, but can't do that without the suffering and death of someone else. She feels her own sin of killing her family in a roified state can't be atoned for, and that's only exemplified to her when the way out is blocked by someone else. Over the course of the route, though it was muddled with so many piss-poor elements, we did see Ciel begin to develop a bond to both Shiki and the day-to-day life at school she had been living. A very all-over-the-place development ranging from accepting him to betraying characterization for half the route to getting back on course only now, but a development that has its traces. Shiki, the one who nudged her in the right direction, seemingly lies dead now. And that's a crushing blow for anyone who's just left a pit of their own self-deprecation. Something that had put her back into the mindset of, what's the point? Back to Shiki's dream, him choosing reality is something that Roa wouldn't be brave enough to do apparently. Awed by Shiki's sheer willpower, the pages of Roa's life story disappear from Shiki's eyes and he slowly wakes up. This route begins with the cold rain hitting his face and ends with Ciel's warm tears hitting it. Shiki's alive, and seeing the impact that had on her makes this scene pseudo-impactful. All of this is propped up by what I'd consider the best CG in the game, mind you. I mean, just look at it. I can feel every emotion conveyed in that exasperated expression and eyes filled with tears that won't let up. That immense sadness at losing her only real loved one replaced with an incomprehensible happiness at seeing him wake up. Combine that with dialogue that doesn't feel like a hackneyed attempt at romance, but genuine love, and I'm honestly almost sold on their relationship immediately. This ending both teases events in future routes with the younger Shiki showing up, and parallels Ciel's own journey so beautifully that it's hard not to just forget everything middling about the route and move immediately onto the maids. You may have noticed that I said pseudo-impactful though. It's cry porn, if you will. Everything is structured as if we just experienced this grand tale. It's such a bizarre case where the ending overshoots the rest of the story by a fucking mile. Points A and C are some of my favorite things in Tsukihime, but the problem is point B is horribly muddled, if not missing entirely in some cases. That middle portion of the story doesn't deserve an ending so wonderfully crafted, nor a beginning that it hardly does anything with. The Ciel route for a large portion of the story is just the Arcway route 2.0, and that's something I can't forget about regardless of how good these 2 points are. These 2 points, that's what the rest of the route should have aspired to. It should have showed us more aspects of Ciel, like seeing her at her strongest, seeing her grappling with choosing between her goal and her cushy school life more than once. It should have developed Shiki and Ciel's relationship beyond the rather surface level interactions it got, and most importantly, it should have showed us Ciel's characterization beyond a horribly underdeveloped relationship with Shiki. I'm not sure if it was time crunch or what, but the choice to use the 3 days of the Nero content just word for word by Nasu is... you can't do that and expect the audience to care nearly as much about Ciel as they do for the rest of the heroines in the visual novel. She just doesn't have the time to develop on her own. You know, she can't develop past her rudimentary goal of being an outlet for Shiki until suddenly Shiki is an outlet for her. I know I've harkened back to it multiple times throughout this video, but that emotional crux, as I call it, of the visual novel, I'll put the CG right here, it's just horrible. It should have done so much better than it did, but it just falls flat because of so many points. This scene encapsulates the main failure of the Ciel route. The best characterization she gets is vicariously through Shiki, and all in hindsight after you've read the route. Shiki's descent parallels Ciel's own, and we can assume she had a very similar recovery, but it's a recovery we never see nonetheless. And a recovery that also happened over the course of the story. That's all assumption on my part though, and though I love that Nasu doesn't expulge every little detail about his work, that works better for more lore-centric elements and not necessarily for characterization. You know, Ciel just doesn't become a compelling character. And it's a shame because the true end clearly demonstrates that she can be just that. Compelling. The manga, as it does with the Arcway route, makes Ciel just that. All the plot-relevant related stuff to Ciel fits rather snugly into that little tale. Both her past with Roa and her job as a member of the church are explored really wonderfully there. And, you know, after reading it, I'm left with a further feeling of, what was the point? All that in mind, the manga is a replacement for the nearside routes in my eyes. With those elements being put into the Arcway route without issue, and Ciel being sidelined in her own route for the majority of the story, not letting us actually experience her character, and Arcway taking over and the good ending of the route essentially becoming the heroine, the Ciel route is left a shapeless husk of what it should have been. The true end makes me think of what could have been. The good ending, however, is the reality Type Moon has left for us. And ultimately, is the ending this middling route deserves. If it's going to piss away Ciel's development for more Arcway time, then the ending should reflect that. This route has so many things that are right up my alley. I mean, Ciel herself, the whole subplot with Roa, and man, that introduction still gives me chills to this day when I read through it. Honestly, without that introductory scene and maybe a bit of the ending, I worry about there being a timeline where I just didn't read the rest of Tsukihime, just electing to write off the rest of it as a waste of time. Which, I'm glad I didn't, because the next 2 routes I plan on covering are what cemented it as my favorite piece of fiction, at least this far in my life. If something comes along and shakes me to my core, I would fucking love it naturally, but time will tell. Oh well, at least we have Ciel in literally any other route, where you do get this feeling that she could be the badass she's built up to be. The Akia route in particular comes to mind as she stays in full control during her fight with Shiki. So essentially, to save 40-ish minutes of your time and give the Cliff Notes version, Ciel works better in a route that's not hers because Type Moon dropped the ball pretty fucking hard. I think that's about it. If you have anything I missed or want to debate any of the points I brought up, leave them in the comments. Also, like and subscribe. I've just passed 300 subs as of writing this, and I think that's pretty neat. Anyways, I'm off to go have an existential crisis and write about the maid routes. Let's meet again somewhere in Tsukihime.